The wind tore through the mountain pass like a blade wrapped in ice, carrying snow so thick it swallowed the world whole. At exactly 3:47 in the morning, the thermometer on the lodge's exterior read 14 degrees. The fireplace inside burned low, flames dancing orange and gold against stone walls that had stood for 73 years without knowing mercy. Aleandro Valenti sat alone in a leather chair the color of dried blood, his storm-gray eyes fixed on the dying fire. He was 43 years old but carried himself like a man who had aged centuries in a single lifetime. His sharp Korean features were cast in shadow, high cheekbones, and a jaw carved from granite, unmarred except for a thin scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, a reminder of a world that did not forgive weakness. He wore a simple black sweater, expensive but understated, the kind of clothing that cost more than most people's monthly rent but whispered rather than screamed. His hands rested on his thighs, each finger adorned with a silver ring, and on his left wrist sat a gold watch that had belonged to his father. He had come to this lodge alone, as he often did when the weight of his empire became too heavy to carry in a city full of eyes. The lodge was isolated, built into a mountainside 3 hours north of Los Angeles, accessible only by a winding road that disappeared into white nothingness when the snow came. No guard stood outside. No men waited in the halls. Here, in this place where few knew to find him, Aleandro allowed himself the luxury of solitude. He allowed himself to remember. The photograph sat on the small table beside his chair, the edges worn soft from handling. It showed a woman with dark eyes and a smile that could disarm a room full of armed men. Her name had been sung in it, and she had been his wife for 12 years before a car accident that was not an accident had taken her from him. That was 5 years ago. The grief had not lessened, it had simply learned to live inside his chest like a stone that never warmed, no matter how much fire surrounded it. On his lap lay a leather wallet, weathered and creased, filled with cards and photographs and the ordinary remnants of a life lived. This wallet had been lost 3 months ago on a street in downtown Los Angeles. He had not even noticed until weeks later when he reached for it and found his pocket empty. It contained nothing of consequence to his empire, nothing that could have been used against him. But it contained everything that mattered. A sound cut through the wind. Not the sound of an engine or approaching footsteps, something else. Something like a body hitting wood. Like collapse. Like the final surrender of something breaking. Aleandro rose slowly, every movement controlled, the way a predator moves through tall grass. He crossed to the heavy oak door and pulled it open. The wind screamed against him, and the snow came in sideways, bitter and sharp as needles against his skin. On the porch lay a woman. She was crumpled like discarded paper, her dark hair plastered to her face, her breath coming in ragged gasps visible in the freezing air. Her coat was torn at the shoulder, the fabric hanging open, and blood dripped from a gash on her temple, staining the white snow beneath her head a dark and devastating red. She could not have been more than 5'5", her frame so thin it looked as though the wind itself might scatter her across the mountainside. Her jeans were ripped at both knees, and her shoes, worn canvas sneakers with a hole in the sole, offered no protection against the cold that had descended like a curse. Her left hand lay open, and in her palm was a crumpled $5 bill. In her right hand, she clutched something small and worn. A pair of child's shoes. Size 4. The kind a 4-year-old would wear. The leather was cracked and faded, but someone had cared for them. Someone had kept them close, held them tight through whatever devastation had brought her to this porch at 3:47 in the morning, bleeding into the snow. Aleandro did not hesitate. He moved forward, his cashmere coat, worth more than her annual salary, had she possessed one, sweeping around him as he lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Like lifting a ghost. Like carrying something that had already begun to slip away from the living world. Her eyes fluttered open, barely conscious, her lips forming a single word. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling like a candle in the wind. "Please, I have nowhere else." He carried her inside and kicked the door shut against the wind. The warmth of the fire hit her like a hand against her face, and she shuddered violently, her small frame convulsing with the shock of transition from cold to heat. He laid her on the thick rug before the fireplace and moved quickly, retrieving blankets from the ottoman, draping them across her body, careful not to disturb the wound on her head. Water. Hot water. He brought a basin and a cloth, and he cleaned the blood from her temple with the gentleness of a man soothing a lost child. The cut was not deep, but it had bled freely, as wounds on the face always did. He found antiseptic in the lodge's first aid kit and worked with efficient precision, bandaging her with hands that knew how to repair broken things. She watched him through half-closed eyes, confusion and fear warring in her gaze. When he finished, he brought her water, room temperature, small sips. Her hand shook so badly that he had to help her drink, holding the glass to her lips while she swallowed. Only then did she press the $5 bill into his hand. For what? His voice was quiet, deep and solid like an oath sworn in darkness. For a dying man, she whispered, her words barely audible. I saw him on the street. Downtown. 3 months ago. He was lying on the sidewalk, no one stopping, everyone just walking past like he was invisible. I found his wallet. It had fallen from his coat. I kept looking for him, asking around the shelter, but I never found him to return it. I found a woman's photograph inside. I thought maybe. Her voice broke. I thought maybe he had someone who loved him. Someone who wanted him to come home. So I kept the wallet safe. I kept it all this time. And the woman in the photograph, she looked kind. She looked like the kind of woman who would forgive a man for being lost. Aleandro looked down at the $5 bill in his hand. Then he looked at the wallet he had been holding when she arrived. He set it on the rug beside her and watched as recognition began to dawn in her eyes. That wallet, he said quietly, was mine. Her entire body went still. The woman in the photograph, he continued, each word measured and precise, was my wife. Sung Minute. She died 5 years ago in an accident I could not prevent, could not stop, could not rewind. I lost that wallet, and I did not even notice. My life was so full of noise and darkness that I did not realize something precious had been taken from me. I did not know until you brought it back. She stared at him, incomprehension and shock warring across her face. You kept it safe, he said. You kept her safe. A woman you had never met. A photograph of a stranger. And you returned what was lost because you believed someone might be searching for it. Because you believed in compassion when the world gave you no reason to. Tears began to slide down her temples, disappearing into her dark hair. I don't understand, she whispered. Who are you? He did not answer that question. Not yet. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning to understand how Aria Voss ended up bleeding on a stranger's doorstep with only $5 to her name and the worn shoes of a child she could not save. 8 months earlier, Aria Voss lived in a shelter on the corner of 5th and Maple. She was 29 years old but looked decades older, her face carved thin by exhaustion and worry, her dark eyes holding the particular hollowness of someone who had learned that hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her skin was pale from too many night shifts, and her hands bore calluses from work that paid $7.50 per hour with no benefits and tips that rarely materialized. She shared a room with her daughter, Emma, who was 4 years old and still believed that things eventually worked out the way they were supposed to. That morning, like every morning, Aria woke at 5 in the darkness and counted the money in her purse. $17.83. She had to make it to Friday. That was for more days. For days to feed herself and Emma, to keep them going, to survive until the next shift at Rosewood Diner paid out what little wage awaited her. Emma was still asleep, curled under a blanket that had been donated 3 months earlier. Her hair was dark like her mother's, her face peaceful in a way that made Aria's chest tighten. She reached out and touched her daughter's forehead, just to feel the warmth of her, just to confirm that this small, perfect person was real and alive and still here. On the shelf beside their bed sat the shoes. They were child shoes, size 4, worn canvas with a hole in the sole. Aria had bought them 2 years ago when Emma first came to live with her, shoes that had carried her daughter through those early months in the shelter, before the foreclosure notice came, before everything fell apart. Emma had outgrown them long ago, but Aria kept them anyway, tucked in a box at the head of their bed, a talisman against loss, a reminder of the moment when she still believed she would be able to keep her daughter safe forever. She dressed quietly and left Emma with one of the shelter volunteers, a woman named Ruth who watched the children during the day while their mothers worked. The November wind was already cold, cutting through her thin coat like a blade. The coat had belonged to someone else once, donated through a charity drive, and it bore the stains of its previous owners like history written in fabric. The diner was 3 blocks away. She walked quickly, her breath visible in the freezing air, her hands shoved into pockets that held nothing but lint and the phantom weight of all the things she no longer possessed. Rosewood Diner had been in the same location for 42 years. The red vinyl booths were cracked in places, and the floor tiles were worn smooth by the passage of millions of feet, but it was warm and it smelled like coffee and grease and the particular staleness of a place that never fully closed. The owner, Mr. Chen, hired people without questions, which meant he hired people with nowhere else to go. Aria clocked in at 6 in the morning and tied on her apron. The fabric was stained from 1,000 shifts, and it had belonged to other waitresses before her. She looked at herself in the small mirror in the employee bathroom and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had she become this version of herself? When had her eyes gone so hollow? By the time her shift ended at 2 in the afternoon, she had earned $32 in tips. She had also eaten a bowl of leftover soup that a customer had left uneaten and half a piece of pie that no one had claimed. Mr. Chen never minded. He understood that his employees were hungry in ways that had nothing to do with food. That evening, she picked up Emma from the shelter and brought her back to their room. She counted her money again, $49.83. She had to stretch this until Friday. That meant instant ramen for dinner, peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, and if there was an emergency, she would have nothing left. Emma sat on the bed and talked about her day, the playground, a drawing she had made, a story Ruth read to them. She was a bright child, intelligent and curious, the kind of child who asked questions about why the sky was blue and why people seemed sad sometimes. Aria listened and tried to smile and tried not to think about the papers she had hidden in the bottom drawer. Papers with a date circled in red. A date that was 2 weeks away. The foreclosure notice had arrived 6 months ago. The house had belonged to her parents, and when they died, her mother from cancer, her father from a heart attack 3 years later, it should have passed to her. But it came with a mortgage still outstanding. A mortgage that somehow, in the chaos of grief and loss and being a single mother, had ballooned into $22,000. The bank had given her 6 months to pay it or face eviction. That 6 months was ending. In 14 days, the house would no longer be hers. Everything she had left of her parents would be gone, sold at auction to the highest bidder, converted into profit for people who had never known them, never loved them, never stood in their kitchen at dawn and pretended that the world was not ending. Emma fell asleep against her chest, and Aria held her daughter and did not cry because crying was a luxury she could not afford, and also because her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 2 years ago, when she had taken her daughter and run. She did not know that in 3 days, everything would change. She did not know that danger was coming for her, moving through the city with intention and hunger, closing in with every passing hour. She did not know that on a mountain road hours away, a man with storm-grey eyes was about to discover that the person who had returned what he had lost was herself lost beyond all finding. The wind outside the shelter window howled through the darkness, and inside their small room, a mother and daughter slept tangled together, holding on to each other like anchors in a sea with no shore. 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday morning when the October wind cut through Los Angeles like a blade wrapped in ice, Aria Voss stood outside Rose's diner with her hands shoved deep into the pockets of a jacket that had belonged to her mother 10 years ago. The fabric was thin. The zipper was broken. She wore it anyway because it was the only coat she owned, and November was coming, and the nights were already cold enough to make Emma cough in the dark. She had been working the breakfast shift for 4 hours. Her feet ached in shoes held together with tape and prayer. Her apron smelled like grease and spilled coffee and the particular exhaustion that comes from standing in one place while your life collapses around you. She had made $43 in tips. $43 that would stretch to feed Emma for maybe 5 more days if she was careful, if she bought the off-brand pasta and the canned vegetables that tasted like metal, if she skipped lunch and ate only what was left on customers' plates when they were not looking. The breakfast crowd had thinned. Aria was sweeping the entrance when she saw it. A black leather wallet lying in the dead leaves that had blown across the sidewalk, skittering against the concrete like small desperate animals. She almost walked past it. For a moment, she did walk past it. Then she stopped. Turned. Came back. The wallet was expensive. That much was immediately clear. The leather was smooth and dark, the kind of leather that cost more than she made in a month. She picked it up. Her hands trembled. $4,000 in cash lay inside, neatly arranged. Credit cards. A driver's license. And a photograph. The woman in the photograph was beautiful in a way that suggested she had never slept on a bathroom floor or rationed food or felt the specific terror of watching your daughter go hungry. She had kind eyes. She was smiling at something the photographer had said, something that had made her genuinely happy. The name on the ID read Aleandro Valenti. The address was in the hills, the part of Los Angeles where houses sat behind gates and security cameras and the kind of wealth that looked like silence. Aria stared at the photograph for a long moment. Sofia Valenti, according to the inscription on the back. Wife. Beloved. She traced her finger over the inscription very carefully, as if touching it might transfer some of that belovedness into her own life, might show her what it felt like to be cherished by someone who lived in a house with gates. She could keep the money. That was the thought that arrived with the force of a confession. $43 in her pocket. $22,000 owed to the bank in just over 2 months. Emma needing winter clothes that she could not afford. A foreclosure notice sitting on the shelter's shared desk, waiting for the 14 days to pass before everything was gone. She could keep the $4,000. She could pay the first month of rent somewhere. Not the foreclosure. Never the foreclosure. But somewhere. Somewhere safe. Instead, she took 3 buses for 2 hours across the city to return it. The address led her to a house that existed in another universe. Iron gates. A driveway long enough to be a street. Trees she could not name. An intercom that required her to explain herself to a voice that did not believe her. A housekeeper eventually appeared, Korean woman with silver hair, skeptical expression. Aria held out the wallet. I found this, Aria said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Outside the diner. On 5th Street. I wanted to return it. The housekeeper took the wallet. Examined it. Her expression shifted into something like confusion, as if Aria had just performed an impossible trick. Your name? The housekeeper asked. Aria, she said. Just Aria. I need to get back. My daughter is waiting at the shelter. She did not wait for a response. She turned and walked back down the driveway, and she did not see the housekeeper watch her go, did not see the moment when Maria, for that was the housekeeper's name, held the wallet and walked inside to find her employer sitting in his study with a glass of whiskey at 6 in the morning. Aleandro Valenti was a man of 38 years who looked like he had lived through 50. His dark hair was silvered at the temples. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, thin and white and precise, the kind of scar that told a story no one survived telling. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and his forearms showed the kind of muscle that came from discipline rather than vanity. His eyes were storm gray, the color of sky before lightning. When he looked at something, it stopped moving. That morning, he was looking at nothing at all. He was thinking about his brother Marco, who had been alive 7 months ago and was now dead because Marco had made a choice that required correction. Aleandro had made the correction himself. He had held his own brother's face in his hands and done what needed to be done, and then he had come home to a house that suddenly felt too large, too full of Maria's cooking and the absence of his wife Sophia, who had died 2 years ago from cancer and had taken with her everything that had once made staying alive feel like something other than a punishment. When Maria placed the wallet on his desk, Aleandro did not move for a long moment. "Who returned this?" he asked. His voice sounded like gravel. Like something that had been buried and then dug up. "A woman," Maria said. "Young. Very thin. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She would not give her name. She said her daughter was waiting at a shelter." Aleandro opened the wallet. $4,000 in cash, completely intact. Credit cards in their slots. His driver's license. And Sophia's photograph. He stared at Sophia's face, at the smile he would never see again, and something cracked open in his chest like an egg with something dangerous inside. "She brought this all the way out here," he said quietly. "With $4,000 inside." "Yes, Signore." Aleandro did not speak for a very long time. When he finally did, his voice had changed into something that Maria had only heard once before, and that was the night when Marco had betrayed the family, when Aleandro had learned that the person he loved most was willing to sell him to rivals for money and power. "There is still honor in this city," Aleandro said. He was not speaking to Maria. He was speaking to the photograph of his dead wife. Someone still knows the value of returning what was lost. He would spend the next 3 months thinking about the woman who had brought back his wallet. He would ask Maria 100 questions. What did she look like? How did she speak? What did she wear? And Maria, who knew very little except that the woman had been desperate and kind, could offer only fragments. Young. Exhausted. A daughter waiting at a shelter. Aleandro would trace these fragments like a man trying to read a letter written in a language he no longer spoke. Who was she? How had she survived long enough to develop a conscience in a world that rewarded cruelty? What kind of person returns for $1,000? He did not know her name. He did not know that her daughter was named Emma and was 6 years old and had learned not to cry because crying wasted energy that could be used for staying alive. He did not know that the foreclosure notice was about to arrive, or that Aria had been counting dollars in the bathroom of a women's shelter at night, or that she had 3 jobs, yes, 3, not 2, because in the weeks that followed, she had added a 3rd shift cleaning office buildings at night while Emma slept in the shelter's aftercare program, and was still falling further behind. What he knew was this: someone in Los Angeles still had honor. And that someone had a daughter. And that daughter was waiting at a shelter. And that was all he needed to know to understand that the universe owed that woman something it had not yet paid. But Aria knew nothing of the man whose wallet she had returned. She knew only that she had done the right thing and that the right thing had changed nothing. The bill still arrived. The foreclosure notice came on a Monday morning in brown official envelope, addressed to her in care of the shelter because the house she was trying to save no longer existed as her home in any meaningful sense. It was a building that the bank owned, that she was permitted to think of as hers only as long as the debt was paid. $22,000. Due in 14 days. She held the notice under the bathroom light and did not cry because her tears had run out somewhere around mile marker 200 on a Greyhound bus 2 years ago, when she had taken Emma and run from a man who believed that he owned both of them, who believed that marriage and fatherhood and breathable air were all things that belonged to him to control and distribute as he saw fit. 3 days after the foreclosure notice arrived, Douglas Hale appeared at the women's shelter. He was a man of 52 years who had built an empire on desperation. He wore a suit that cost $8,000 and shoes made from leather that had once been an animal that lived in a country Aria had never seen. He had white teeth and a smile that looked like a predator's display. He carried a leather briefcase and moved through the shelter like he owned it, which he nearly did. His shell corporations funded half its operation, which meant he had leverage, which meant that when he asked to speak with Aria Voss, no one was going to say no. She was in the kitchen preparing lunch for the afternoon shift when the director found her. Her face went white before her brain had even registered what was happening, before her body understood that the danger she had run from in Oklahoma was here now, was in Los Angeles, was standing in the director's office asking questions in a voice like honey that was slowly poisoning everything it touched. "Tell her she has nothing to fear," Douglas Hale said to the director, smiling his predator's smile. "I just want to talk to her about a business opportunity. A way to make real money. A way to keep her house. To keep her daughter safe. Aria is a smart woman. I think she will be very interested in hearing what I have to offer." And in the kitchen, Aria held a wooden spoon in her hand and understood that everything she had run toward was not escape but merely delay. That her creditors and her past and her desperation had all been slowly closing in while she counted dollars and wore her mother's broken jacket and told Emma that everything would be fine, that they just needed a little more time. The spoon fell from her hand and clattered against the floor, and the sound it made was like the first note of a song that would reshape her entire life. The spoon clattered against the floor, and the sound of it was like the first domino falling in a chain that could not be stopped. Aria stood frozen in the kitchen of the shelter, her hands trembling, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had heard the director's voice moments before. She had heard the way it changed when the man spoke to her, the way authority becomes something smaller, something bent. And she knew. Before her brain could form the thought, her body already understood that Douglas Hale had found her. She moved mechanically through the rest of her shift, plating food, wiping counters, pretending that her world was not collapsing. But her mind was running 3 steps ahead, calculating distances, counting money, measuring the impossible choice that was coming. At 5 o'clock, when her shift ended, Aria left through the back entrance. She did not go to her room. She did not collect Emma from after-school care. Instead, she walked to the corner diner 2 blocks away, the one where she picked up double shifts on weekends. The October wind cut through the street like a blade wrapped in ice, and leaves scattered across the pavement in patterns that looked almost like writing, almost like a warning. She was wiping down the counter when he walked in. He was 51 years old, maybe older, with silver hair combed back from a face that looked like it belonged in a photograph in a business magazine. His suit was grey and expensive, the kind of expensive that whispers rather than shouts. He moved through the diner like he was walking through his own home, and every person inside seemed to understand without being told that this man was not someone who stood in lines or waited for service. He sat in the corner booth. He ordered black coffee. He waited until Aria brought it to him. "Aria Voss," he said. It was not a question. His voice was smooth, honeyed, the kind of voice that made you want to trust him even as something in your body screamed not to. She set the cup down carefully. "Yes? I hear you are looking for work," he continued, stirring the coffee with deliberate slowness. "Better work than this. Better pay." "I have work," Aria said quietly. "You have survival," Hale corrected. "There is a difference. I run a recruitment agency. Domestic workers, caregivers, people who can move into homes and provide real care. The pay is excellent. $2,000 a month, sometimes more. And all you would have to do is introduce me to women you know. Women in difficult situations. You know where they are. Shelters. Churches. Soup kitchens. You bring them to me, I place them in good positions, and you receive $500 per referral. $500. That number hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat. "What kind of jobs?" Aria asked, though she already knew. "Domestic. Caregiving. Very safe. Very legal." He smiled, and his teeth were too white, too perfect. "I take care of the women who work with me. They are grateful. They send money home. Their families are grateful too." Ice moved through Aria's stomach. "I can't do that." "Can't? Or won't?" Hale leaned forward. His cologne was expensive and overwhelming. "You have $22,000 due in 11 days. I checked. You have a daughter. Emma. 7 years old. She is very beautiful. I saw her photograph on the shelter bulletin board. The air in the diner seemed to stop moving. Think about it, Hale said, sliding a business card across the table. It was cream-colored, expensive paper. When you realize you need this, you know how to reach me. Aria picked up the card with fingers that did not feel like her own. She watched him stand, leave cash on the table for the coffee, and walk out through the door. The moment he was gone, she tore the card into pieces and dropped it in the trash. But that night, back in her room at the shelter, she found another card slipped beneath her door. And another under her pillow. He knew where she slept. He knew everything. Across the city, in a Beverly Hills estate that overlooked the lights of Los Angeles like a kingdom, Diana Whitfield stood in her office and sipped white wine from a crystal glass. Her office was all marble and modern art, the kind of space that cost more than Aria Voss would earn in her entire lifetime. She was 48 years old and looked like the kind of woman who had never experienced hunger or fear or loss. Her platinum blonde hair was perfect. Her diamonds caught the light and threw it back. She was dressed in Armani, and her shoes cost more than a month of Aria's rent. "How many this month?" she asked, and her voice was pleasant, conversational. Douglas Hale stood across from her. In this room, even he seemed smaller. 17. Good quality. The Prague route is confirmed. And the Voss woman? She refused, Hale said simply. Diana's expression changed. It was like watching sunlight leave a room. Then she is a liability. Make her disappear. No one looks for a shelter resident, Douglas. No one cares. Hale nodded, understanding without being told that this was not a request. There are 2 federal agents asking questions about Prague. She could become a problem. She will not be a problem, Diana said, turning away. Because she will not exist. Do this quietly. Do this completely. And do it soon. By the next morning, Aria knew she had to run. She packed a single bag, her mother's broken jacket, a change of clothes, the photograph of her mother taken 3 years before the cancer came. And the shoes. Emma's first pair, the white leather shoes with the tiny buckles, kept from 8 months ago when they first arrived at the shelter. They were the only proof that there had been a time before this, a time when things had been different. She took Emma from school an hour early. The girl was confused but did not ask questions. They took a bus to the Greyhound station using Aria's last $47. She bought a ticket north, toward the mountains, toward anywhere that was not here. For 3 days, they ran. 3 days of sleeping in bus stations, of Aria watching the door, of knowing that at any moment the men would find them. 3 days of Emma asking quietly if they were playing a game, if Mommy was okay, if they were going to see the shelter again. On the 3rd day, at a remote stop in the mountains, Aria saw the black SUVs turning into the parking lot. She grabbed Emma and ran into the trees. The blizzard had started an hour earlier. The snow came down like a punishment, heavy and relentless. Aria ran until her lungs burned, until her feet could not find solid ground, until the cold had taken everything except the animal need to keep moving. She stumbled down a slope. Her head struck a rock. Blood ran warm down her temple, mixing with melting snow. She saw lights ahead. A building. She ran toward it, running toward anything, toward nowhere, toward the only possibility left. The lodge materialized through the snow like something from a dream. A 2-story structure of timber and stone, lights burning yellow in the windows, smoke rising from a chimney. And on the steps, she collapsed. Her last conscious thought was of Emma's shoes. Still in her hand. Still safe. Still proof of survival. And on the other side of the mountain, in a truck moving through the blizzard, Douglas Hale checked his phone. Aria Voss was not answering. But he knew exactly where she had gone. By noon tomorrow, this would be finished. He was running out of time, but so was she. The wind screamed against the lodge windows like something dying. Outside, snow fell so thick that the world had become nothing but white, endless white, swallowing the driveway, the trees, the possibility of escape. Inside, Aria Voss stood at the kitchen counter at 12:15 in the afternoon, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the small pair of child shoes, worn leather, laces frayed, the first real shoes Emma had ever owned. The photograph sat beside her on the granite counter. Sofia Valenti's face, young and alive, frozen in time. A woman Aria had never met but whose absence had shaped the man sleeping in the room down the hall. She could hear them. Through the door, through the walls, the low, urgent voices of Aleandro and his men, preparing for what was coming. Tactical discussions. Weapon inventory. Plans that assumed she was worth protecting. The thought crushed her. "Everyone I touch gets hurt," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "My mother died trying to keep that house for me. Emma deserves better than a mother who cannot even keep a roof over her head. And now I have brought killers to a man who showed me kindness when he owed me nothing." The $5 bill lay on the counter beside the shoes. The only money she had left in the world. She stared at it, and the terrible mathematics of her life became suddenly simple. One number. That is what she was worth. That is what she had always been worth. Her hand reached toward the door handle. The metal was cold, burning against her palm. The blizzard was a mercy now. If she walked out into it, if she disappeared into that whiteness, Hale would follow her. Away from here. Away from Aleandro. The lodge would be safe. Emma would be safe. She could at least do that. She could at least choose that one thing. The cold was already against her skin through the glass pane. Then she saw it. The photograph again. Sofia's eyes looking out from the silver frame on the side table, and with it came the memory of Aleandro's words, spoken quietly in the darkness of the bedroom hours earlier. "You chose honor when you had every reason not to. You returned my wife's photograph. The wallet you could have sold. The photograph you could have thrown away. Instead you chose to return it to a stranger. That takes a kind of strength that cannot be taught." Her hand dropped from the door handle. No. Running was not honor. Running was surrender. Fighting was what remained when surrender was no longer possible. She turned back into the lodge. Away from the door. Away from the blizzard. Toward whatever was coming. Footsteps crossed the timber floor. Aleandro appeared in the kitchen doorway at 12:47, his frame filling the space, shadow falling across the counter. He did not ask. He simply looked at her hand, still extended toward the cold, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition. "You were going to leave," he said quietly. It was not a question. "How did you?" "I have been running from things my whole life," he said. "I know the look. I have worn it myself." She met his eyes. They were gray like a winter sky, and in them she could see something she had never expected to see in the face of a man with blood on his hands. Kindness. Real kindness, not the transactional sort, not the kind that expected payment. "I do not want you hurt because of me," she said. "Too late," he replied, and there was the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. "You returned my wife's photograph. You reminded me why I became what I am. Not for the money. Not for the power. To protect people who cannot protect themselves. I lost that somewhere in the years of blood and money. You gave it back to me." The kitchen fell silent except for the wind outside. The door burst open. Tony stood in the frame, coat dusted with snow, his face tight with urgency. "They are coming," he said. 12 vehicles. 40 men at minimum. Hale and Whitfield are both here. They are coordinating. 5 minutes away. Maybe less. Aleandro's expression became stone. His entire body seemed to harden into something immobile, something lethal. "Then we end this," he said. "Now." He moved toward the window. Aria reached out without thinking and grabbed his wrist. For a moment, neither of them moved. "There is something you do not know," she said quietly. His eyes found hers. 3 days ago, when I was running, I stopped at a gas station outside the city limits. I used a burner phone and called the FBI tip line. Everything. I told them everything: Hale's name, Whitfield's foundation, the Prague route, the financial records I saw on Hale's desk. There were women in those files, Aleandro. 39 of them. I could not save them by running. But I could by stopping. The room had gone completely still. Even the wind seemed to pause. So when they come, she continued, they will not find what they expect. The FBI knows. They know everything. Aleandro did not move. His hand was still wrapped around his wife's photograph. Tony's radio crackled. Enzo's voice, tight and fast: "Boss, black vehicles coming up the mountain. Federal plates. Sirens. They have blocked all exits. 16 vehicles minimum." Aleandro looked at Aria for another moment. Then he released the photograph and placed his hand over hers. "You saved me first," he said. 3 months ago, when you were nothing but a stranger in this city, you saved me." The sirens grew louder. Not one or two, but many, wailing in harmony like something calling out from the darkness. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the mountain road had become a war zone of federal vehicles. Black SUVs, tactical trucks, agents in armor moving like a single organism through the snow. The FBI came in waves. 16 vehicles. 200 agents. Overwhelming force. The kind of apparatus that only the federal government could assemble when the stakes were this high. Aleandro and his men stood down without a word. His lieutenant Tony raised his hands the moment the first agent approached the lodge entrance. There was no fight here. There was only acknowledgement of a force too large to resist. But Douglas Hale did not understand surrender. He ran. The snow was deep and unforgiving. Hale's expensive shoes, Italian leather, $300 a pair, slipped and slid on the ice beneath the powder. His suit, tailored in Milan, was no match for the mountain wind. He gasped and lurched through the drifts like a drowning man, his breath coming in ragged, panicked spurts. For 3 days he had imagined capturing Aria Voss. He had not imagined the moment he would be captured himself. 2 federal agents emerged from the white, moving with the casual precision of hunters who had cornered their prey. Hale tried to pivot, tried to run back toward the trees. One agent cut him off. The other approached from behind. He went down hard, his face buried in snowbank, the cold shocking the air from his lungs. When they flipped him over, his makeup was running, his hair torn. He was trembling like a cornered animal, like something that had just realized that the world was larger and colder and more merciless than his ambition could explain. "I have rights," he gasped. "I have lawyers." Agent Rebecca Chen, 40 years old, with eyes that had seen the worst of humanity and refused to look away, stepped into his line of vision. She was holding a folder filled with photographs. The faces of women. 39 women. "You have the right to remain silent," she said, and her voice was like ice. 47 counts of human trafficking. Conspiracy. Racketeering. Money laundering. You are looking at 40 years in federal prison, Mr. Hale. Minimum. Possibly life. Hale's entire body began to shake. Not from the cold anymore, but from something deeper. The understanding that he had lost. That this was over. That the powerful men he had known, the money he had accumulated, the network he had built, all of it had evaporated like snowmelt. He began to cry. Diana Whitfield did not cry. She stepped out of the back of her Mercedes SUV at 1:15 in the afternoon, diamonds still glittering on her wrists and throat, her fur coat pristine despite the chaos, her silver hair perfectly arranged. In her mind, problems were solved with the right conversation. The right words. The right connections. She had navigated every scandal of her 63-year life with the grace of someone born into a world where consequences were negotiable. This world, she thought as Agent Chen approached, would be no different. "Agent Chen, there has been a terrible misunderstanding," Whitfield said, and her voice was smooth as silk. "I am a philanthropist. I chair the Pacific Charities Foundation. There has clearly been some sort of accounting error. My lawyers will clarify everything. Chen opened the folder. Photographs spilled out. Women's faces. Transfer documents. Bank records. Encrypted communications. Evidence, carefully assembled, that transformed the philanthropist into something else entirely. Your foundation laundered $14 million in trafficking proceeds, Chen said coldly. We have your financial records, Mrs. Whitfield. Your encrypted communications with Mr. Hale. The women you sold into slavery across 8 countries. The ones still missing. The ones we found in Prague in a basement, locked in rooms with a view of nothing but concrete walls. Whitfield's perfect smile fractured. I want my lawyer, she whispered. You will need a dozen, Chen replied. She nodded. Four agents moved forward in perfect formation. Handcuffs appeared. Metal against skin. The diamond bracelets that had taken decades to accumulate, all of it twisted into a single moment of restraint. They led her toward the black vehicle. A news helicopter circled above. Cameras rolled. The moment was being captured, being transmitted, being broadcast live across every news channel in the city. Diana Whitfield, society icon, author of the book that had sold 2 million copies about the importance of charity, handcuffed in the snow while federal agents read her rights. The fall happened in real time. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, her name was synonymous with predation. The board of her foundation had already begun resigning. Major donors were calling for investigations. Museums were removing her name from buildings. Universities were returning her donations. The empire she had spent 40 years constructing had begun collapsing before her eyes, and she could only watch it happen, could only feel the weight of consequence settling on her shoulders like snow. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. This systematic destruction, this public humiliation, this social annihilation, was justice. Aria watched from the lodge window, Aleandro standing beside her, his presence steady and immovable as stone. Through the glass, she could see the black vehicles, the agents moving with purpose, the slow assembly of federal machinery that had come because she had chosen to call. Because she had trusted that the system, for all its failures, still possessed the capacity to recognize evil and respond. Agent Chen appeared at the lodge door at 2:45. She was accompanied by 2 other agents, and she carried a folder that seemed to contain her entire investigation, years of work, mountains of evidence, the careful assembly of a case that had finally found its final piece. You are Aria Voss, Chen said, and it was not a question. Aria nodded, her voice barely steady. Is it over? For them, yes. Hale is facing 40 years minimum. Whitfield is facing life. We have identified 39 victims so far. More coming forward every hour. You saved them. All of them. Aria started to cry. Chen turned to Aleandro, and you are Aleandro Valenti. I know exactly who you are. Aleandro met her gaze without flinching. Then you know I had nothing to do with this. I protected her. That is all. I do, Chen said, and there was something like respect in her voice. Your assistance in protecting Ms. Voss will be noted in my report. Stay clean, Mr. Valenti. The world is watching now. After the agents left, after the vehicles had begun their descent down the mountain, after the sirens had faded into distance, Aria turned to Aleandro in the quiet of the lodge. You could have turned me away, she said. Let them take me. It would have been safer for you. He looked at her with those storm-grey eyes, and she saw in them the face of a man seeing his own reckoning reflected back. You saved me 3 months ago, he said. You just did not know it. That night I lost the wallet. I was standing on a bridge in downtown Los Angeles. The bridge that crosses the concrete river. I was deciding whether to jump. My brother's betrayal, my wife's death, the weight of everything I had done to build my empire, I had nothing left to hold me to this world. Nothing. Then the next day, someone brought the wallet back. Someone who could have kept the cash, sold the credit cards, thrown away the photograph. Instead you chose to return it. You chose honor when honor had no value. It gave me a reason to believe in myself again. So no, I could not turn you away. You saved me first. She reached toward him, and he took her hand. Outside, the blizzard had begun to soften. The snow fell slower now, gentler, as if even the weather understood that something had shifted. That this night, this terrible night, had finally ended. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. The courthouse steps blazed with November sunlight, cold and unforgiving, cutting across the grey stone like a blade. Aria Voss stood at the bottom of the staircase, her hand trembling as she held the cashier's check. $22,000. The number had never felt real until this moment, when the paper sat heavy in her palm like a weight that could either save her or crush her beneath its implications. 2 weeks had passed since the blizzard. 2 weeks since the federal agents had descended on the lodge like ghosts in the snow, since Douglas Hale had been hauled away screaming obscenities, since Diana Whitfield's empire of cruelty had begun its public dissolution across every news channel in the state. 2 weeks since Aria had walked out of that mountain lodge alive, free, and utterly terrified of what came next. Emma held her hand, the small fingers warm despite the cold. The girl wore new shoes now, purchased 3 days ago at a department store, her feet finally fitted for her actual size instead of the hand-me-downs from the shelter donation bin. But Aria had kept the original pair, those tiny leather shoes from when Emma was born, wrapped now in white tissue paper and placed carefully in a box beneath her bed at the small motel where they were staying. Those shoes had kept her tethered to something when everything else was drowning. She could not bring herself to throw them away. "I do not want to go inside," Emma whispered, her voice trembling like a candle in the wind. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for 1:45 p.m. The lien sale would begin at 2 o'clock. Every second mattered. Every second counted down to the moment Aria would either own her daughter's future or lose it forever to the county assessor's gavel. "We have to," Aria said softly, squeezing the small hand. "This is how we take back what is ours." The courthouse hall smelled like floor wax and old paper, like the accumulated dust of 1,000 broken promises. Aria's footsteps echoed on marble, each step another second ticking away. Her heart moved at a different pace than her body, racing ahead to the clerk's office, to the moment when she would hand over the check and hear those words, "Lien satisfied." Free and clear. The check had come from Aleandro 3 days after the raid, delivered by Tony, who had stood in the motel doorway with his dark suit and expressionless face, holding an envelope that contained not words but a future. She had stared at it for hours before opening it. When she finally did, her hands had shaken so violently she could barely read the amount. "I cannot take this," she had said when Aleandro arrived that evening, still wearing the same clothes from the mountain, his face shadowed with exhaustion and something else, something that looked like grief. "You have done enough." He had been sitting in the motel chair, legs crossed, watching her with those storm-grey eyes that seemed to contain entire lifetimes of sorrow. His voice emerged deep and solid like an oath. "You can, and you will. Not as charity. As payment." Payment for what? She had heard the desperation in her own voice, the hungry sound of someone reaching for a reason to believe in mercy. "For reminding me what matters. For giving me back my wife's photograph. For showing me that honor still exists. For saving my life on a bridge I never told you about." She had started to argue, but he had placed his hand over hers, and the touch had been so gentle, so deliberate, that her resistance had crumbled like old brick. "Let someone help you, Aria. The way you helped me. You returned my wallet when you had nothing. Now let me return the favor." The clerk's office was on the 2nd floor. A woman with grey hair and reading glasses looked up from her desk as Aria approached, Emma's hand still clutching her mother's fingers like a lifeline. "I need to satisfy a lien," Aria said. "A property at 4287 East Brook Avenue. The foreclosure auction is scheduled for this afternoon. I have the amount in full." The clerk's expression shifted, softened slightly, as if she understood without being told that this was not just paperwork, this was resurrection. She took the check, examined it with practiced eyes, ran it through the verification system. The computer hummed, the printer ground to life, and Aria felt something ancient and exhausted inside her chest begin to loosen. "Leon satisfied," the clerk said, stamping the paperwork with a sound like a gavel coming down. "The property is yours. Free and clear. You own it." Aria could not speak. The words caught in her throat like shattered glass. Emma squeezed her hand and looked up at her mother with eyes that held for years of shelter hallways and shared beds and the constant question, "Where will we sleep tomorrow?" "We own it," Emma whispered. "We have a home." When they stepped back out into the November cold, the wind caught Aria's hair, pulled it loose from the braid she had tied that morning. She did not bother to fix it. She simply stood on the courthouse steps, the certified paperwork in her hands, and breathed. 3 blocks away, at a luxury hotel, Aleandro was meeting with his lieutenants in a conference room on the 42nd floor. The Los Angeles sprawled beneath the windows in shades of gray and steel. Tony and Enzo sat across from him at a polished table, their expressions caught between shock and grudging respect. "We are liquidating the South Side operations," Aleandro said, his voice steady despite the seismic shift happening inside his empire. "The distribution network becomes a legitimate import business. Real estate holdings go into a foundation. No more shadows." Enzo's jaw tightened. "And if the remaining families do not accept this transition? Then we are no longer in that particular business," Aleandro said simply. "I have spent 8 years building an empire on the blood of vulnerable people. My wife died while I was building it. My brother destroyed me while I was protecting it. A woman with $5 in her pocket showed me more honor than anyone I have known in my entire life. That ends today." The rain began that evening, soft and persistent, tapping against the windows of the small craftsman bungalow on East Brook Avenue. Aleandro stood in the front doorway, water beading on his cashmere coat, worth more than Aria's annual salary 5 times over. Behind him, the engine of the black SUV idled at the curb, his security detail maintaining distance but vigilance. Aria opened the door, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, 2 broken people standing in the threshold between what they had been and what they were becoming. "You did not have to come," she said. "I wanted to see it," he replied. "The house worth fighting for." She led him through the space, and he moved slowly, deliberately, seeing not just the walls but the life contained within them. Emma's room, painted yellow as bright as sunlight. The kitchen where Aria's mother had taught her to cook, before the drinking, before the fists, before everything scattered. The backyard with the old oak tree, its branches bare now, preparing for winter, but alive, enduring, waiting for spring. "It is not much," Aria whispered. "It is everything," Aleandro corrected. "This is what home looks like. This is what I was searching for when I chose the wrong path." They sat on the back porch as darkness fell, the dry cold wind rustling through dead leaves with a sound like whispers. Emma was asleep inside, one small arm wrapped around the new stuffed rabbit Aleandro had brought her, a gesture so simple that it had made Aria's throat constrict. "What happens now?" Aria asked. "For you, I mean. The FBI is watching everything." He was quiet for a long time, his hands folded, his eyes distant. "Yes. It is time for changes. Tony and Enzo are helping me transition the business. Legitimate investments. Real estate. Security consulting. No more shadows. Sophia would want that." "Sophia," Aria said softly, "was your wife?" He nodded. "She died 3 years ago. Cancer. I was in meetings building my empire when she was dying in a hospital bed. I was not there when she took her last breath. I was negotiating territory instead of holding her hand. And I was returning your wallet," Aria said, understanding dawning. "The day you needed saving." "Yes." He turned to face her fully, and she saw the weight of 3 years of grief in his eyes. The weight of regret, of waste, of time that could not be reclaimed. "What about you? What happens now?" "I have a job offer," Aria said. "The FBI connected me with a victims advocacy nonprofit. Helping trafficking survivors find housing, employment, legal representation. It pays enough. Emma will have stability. That is enough. Is it? He asked quietly. She met his eyes, and she understood that he was not asking about the job, not about stability or money or the logistics of survival. What are you really asking? She said. He reached across the space between them, and his hand found hers in the darkness. The night you returned my wallet, you saved me. 2 weeks ago, I saved you. But maybe we were not saving each other from danger. Maybe we were saving each other from being alone. I have spent 2 years alone, Aria. I am tired of it. I do not want to be alone anymore. She trembled, and not from the cold. I am scared. Of this. Of you. Of what it means. Me too, he admitted. I have spent 2 years being afraid. Afraid to feel. Afraid to hope. Afraid to believe that anything good could come from hands as stained as mine. You changed that. You are changing everything. They sat in the fading light, hands intertwined, two people who had survived their own destruction and found each other in the ruins. From inside the house came a small sound, a child's cry muted by walls and distance. Aria started to stand, but Aleandro squeezed her hand gently. I will go, he said. She has come to trust me in these 2 weeks. Let me. He stood and walked inside, and Aria heard him moving through the dark house with surprising gentleness for a man whose movements had always carried threat. She heard his voice, low and steady, speaking to Emma in the darkness. She heard the child quiet, heard the rumble of him reading a story, one of the picture books Aria had purchased from the used bookstore, the same bookstore where she had once shoplifted food. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. The words came to her unbidden, a truth she had not known she understood until she heard it. Outside, the November rain fell harder, and inside, a man who had built empires on exploitation was learning to read bedtime stories to a 4-year-old who had never known safety until 2 weeks ago. And in that moment, everything changed. Not the physical world, not the systems of violence and hierarchy that still governed the city beyond this small house. But something inside both of them, something that had been broken so completely that they thought it could never be repaired, began the slow work of healing. The rain drummed on the roof like a heartbeat. Like a prayer. Like the first sound of something coming back to life. Word count, 1847. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like and share this video with the people you love. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation. We wish all of you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace.